UFC 209 is this weekend, and it features one of the best cards the UFC has ever put on. The main event is going to be headlined by Tyron Woodley, who will be defending his title once again against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in a rematch of one of the most controversial fights in UFC history. Everything that surrounded the fight afterwards was very, very odd, and Tyron Woodley has been going on a tirade against just about everybody, saying that everything is racist, the UFC is racist, calling the fans racist, whereas Wonderboy Thompson is just a likable guy who's going out there. He's going to be pretty much the people's champ going into that fight. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes and what happens afterwards, especially because Tyron Woodley and Dana White are sort of going at each other in the media, so it's very interesting to see how that's going on. But the fight I'm going to be talking about in this video is Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson, which is, in my opinion, probably the best lightweight fight in UFC history. These two guys match up so well, and it probably is going to be a fight of the year contender. It's going to be so amazing. But the rest of the card also has some big fights like Mark Hunt versus Alistair Overeem. So I will be talking about the rest of the card in a separate video. Another video will be featuring only the main event, but this one's going to be about the co-main event. So stick around on the Foot and Fist Sports Network for more about this epic fight. So this fight is going to be a tale of two very different fighters who also have a lot of similarities. Tony Ferguson has an epic ground game, and most of his wins come by submissions. But the difference between him and Khabib, who also gets a lot of submissions, is the fact that Tony Ferguson usually gets people into those submission spots by hurting them on the feet and getting them desperate, and they shoot him for a takedown. He either gets in a darce or he locks him up with some crazy jiu-jitsu move. He's got such an amazing ground game. You know, Ferguson, being one of the most well-known 10th Planet Jiujitsu students, has some amazing moves that not a lot of people know of. I mean, Eddie Bravo talks about it all the time on the Joe Rogan podcast, but a lot of people who aren't even part of 10th Planet, just people that are big fans of the sport and stuff like that, they always say that whenever they go and visit 10th Planet just to see what's going on there, I think it was Robin Black who was talking about it recently on the Joe Rogan Experience, was talking about how these guys, and not even the professional fighters, just guys that are in there all the time, are constantly coming up with new submissions. And Tony Ferguson represents that perfectly. Every time we see him in the octagon, he brings some kind of new crazy move. Against Edson Barboza, we saw him with some crazy elbows. We saw him against Rafael dos Anjos. He loves doing those cartwheels. Not really cartwheels, but he likes doing flips. A lot of times his sprawls are actually sort of front forward rolls that get him out of submission, out of bad spots, and he actually manages to use those rolls to get himself into very, very favorable positions, and sometimes even ending up a mount and stuff like that. He used that excellently against Rafael dos Anjos in particular. Just overall, he is one of those guys who you never really know what he's going to do. Khabib Nurmagomedov also has an amazing ground game. I mean, his wrestling, his Sambo, his Judo all mixed in together. It might be the most impressive wrestling-based style we've seen in the octagon. I mean, he's 23-0, if I'm not mistaken, 24-0. And to have done that against some of the best fighters, like what we saw him do against Rafael dos Anjos, was simply amazing. Now, dos Anjos wasn't quite as good as he was after that fight. For some odd reason, he became amazing after that. But I think that in that fight, we really saw how good Khabib was, because all of his other opponents, they weren't necessarily top level. I mean, Tony Ferguson has fought a lot of guys that are arguably on Khabib's level, or at least slightly below him, like dos Anjos, like Edson Barboza. He's fought a lot of those tough guys. Khabib has only fought dos Anjos, so we're going to really see what he's made of. Michael Johnson, who was his last fight, was a very tough opponent, but Michael Johnson has one big weakness, which is the fact that he doesn't really have a wrestling defense. You can't have that big a weakness in wrestling when you're taking on Khabib, who is just outstanding in every single way in grappling. So there was never really a chance of Michael Johnson winning if that fight even went to the ground at all. And there was one really, really big moment in that fight that really showed that Khabib isn't just some unstoppable machine. We saw Michael Johnson rock him. And that's a big deal for Tony Ferguson because, you know, Tony is one of those guys who can take bombs for days. He can take a beating and keep on going. In fact, he's one of those guys who he's actually willing to take a big hit in order to give an even bigger hit. That's his type of thing. He's a very gritty guy. He's a very intense guy. He loves to break people, which is very similar to Khabib. He loves getting on people and breaking them. Michael Johnson, when Khabib was on top of him, pounding him, he kept on getting him in the crucifix positions and just wailing on him nonstop. Khabib was actually telling him, "You have to give up. You have to give up. I was born to win this. It is my destiny." Stuff like that. He was actually saying that stuff. Now, if you want to really know what it said, look at the breakdown by Dan Hardy on the UFC. What's it called? Inside the Octagon. Check that out. It'll probably be in the link in the description down below. So, but he was actually saying some crazy ass shit. So this is a very intense guy, just like Tony Ferguson. So it's going to be a battle between guys who have epic ground games. But the big difference between them here is that Tony Ferguson is very, very dangerous on the feet. He has such unorthodox strikes. He's got good kicks. He's got very, very good leg kicks. Even though his style isn't necessarily perfect, he's just got a lot of power in those leg kicks. Not like Edson Barboza power, but he can definitely fuck you up with a leg kick. He's got some very unorthodox strikes. He's very, very heavy-handed as well. You know, we saw him against Lando Venata, who Lando isn't a very well-known fighter, but he is a very high-level kickboxer. I mean, with Coach Winklejohn of Greg Jackson's camp, we really saw what kind of a striker he is. Going against Ferguson, nobody gave him any chance, and he went out there and he put on one hell of a striking performance. Obviously, Tony Ferguson being one of the best mixed martial artists of all time. Well, not of all time, maybe, but he's definitely in the running to eventually be that. He was obviously going to be too much for Venata, who is still very early on in his MMA career, but it was still a very impressive performance. So we've seen Tony Ferguson demolish some very high-level strikers, in particular Edson Barboza. We saw him go toe-to-toe, with Barboza and come out there the winner and winning in a very emphatic fashion. So we all know that Tony Ferguson can definitely go deep, especially in striking, but we don't really know what Khabib can do on the feet. You know, we've seen him hurt a lot of guys. They were talking about this inside the octagon. He has some very awkward strikes as well, which is in fact what won Tony Ferguson's first fight in the UFC, which was his win over Ramsey Nijem, which gave him that $1 million contract. So they do have some similarities, but the difference is Tony Ferguson has a lot of different aspects to his striking repertoire, whereas Khabib is very, very basic in the sense that he loves getting inside, and he uses his strikes only to get inside, whereas Tony Ferguson uses them to simply brutalize you. And the big difference here is going to be, can Tony Ferguson use his big striking advantage to keep the distance and keep Khabib out of his range? Because if Khabib can get inside, that's where things get pretty balanced out. Whereas Tony Ferguson, who has a 6-inch reach advantage, if he can keep him out there and really keep Khabib on the edge of his punches, then he can really dominate that fight. Because if Khabib gets compromised early on, then his wrestling is going to be compromised big time. And once Tony Ferguson can do that, then the fight really, really, really gets into his favor. However, if Khabib can somehow figure out a way to neutralize Tony Ferguson's rubber guard, then that's where things can get very, very fishy for very, very dangerous for Ferguson. You know, nobody can stand the kind of pressure that Khabib puts on if you don't somehow find a way to keep him off of you. You know, we saw him against, I can't remember exactly who it was. We saw him in a fight early on against the guy who was a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. I can't remember who it was. It was one of those fights, a guy who was a very elite black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. I apologize. But we saw him on the bottom. Khabib was on top, and he was just giving him no room to go. Every time the guy would try to put his feet on his hips and on his knees or whatever, just to get some kind of space, Khabib would just get right back on him, and he would give him no space. If Ferguson finds himself in that position, and granted, Ferguson is a much more dangerous guy because of his wrestling as well. He's a much better fighter than the guy I was mentioning earlier. But at the same time, you know, if Khabib can get himself in that type of position where Ferguson has no room, then he can really go to work and he can really, really, really tire out Ferguson and really put a beating on him. Now, the difference here is Ferguson is one of those very few guys in the octagon who can really match Khabib in intensity, in grit, and just simply in badassery. I mean, we've seen Tony Ferguson over the years. When we saw him come into the UFC, he was just a very tough guy. He had a lot of skill, but he definitely wasn't like this guy that everybody expected to be an amazing fighter. Now, he was actually one of the first fighters I saw in the UFC. I watched the first season with him with Brock and Junior Dos Santos as the coaches, and from then I started watching him more often. And from then I figured, you know, Tony Ferguson, because I was very basic at the time, so I figured Tony Ferguson, you could tell among the guys in that house, he had a lot more talent than everybody other than Ramsey Nijem, who I actually thought was probably going to win that, which is probably weird, but you know, I saw him at the early stages of his career, and to see him from then to now, it's just amazing the difference, because he put everything together in a way that I really didn't expect him to do it. Because when you see him move, he doesn't seem like a very athletic guy, or at least doesn't seem like an elite athlete. He has a very, very strange movement. He seems like he's very confined, but in a weird way, he's not. You know, his movement looks very kind of stiff in a way, but at the same time, he's just so amazingly flexible on the ground. But on the feet, he's just so weird. He hits weird angles. Everything he does is just very bizarre. So I'm very, very surprised to see how good he's gotten, and I don't really know how Khabib is going to be able to figure out how to keep him off there, because on the ground he's constantly moving, and he's not your typical jiu-jitsu guy who's, going to be there. He's going to get stationary. He's going to wait and try to read what you're going to do next, and then he's going to move on from there and try to be a couple steps ahead of you once he figures out what you want to do. Tony Ferguson doesn't play that game. Tony Ferguson is constantly moving his hips. He's constantly trying to roll. He's constantly trying to hit you with submissions. He's constantly trying to get you into dangerous positions and try to basically reverse everything you do and get you into a very, very dangerous position. I mean, we've seen him. He has an amazing rubber guard. He can submit you from the bottom. He can submit you from the top. He can submit you from the side. He can submit you from the sprawl. He can submit you from the clinch. He's dangerous in every single situation. And Khabib simply, in my opinion, doesn't really have that. He has a lot of power. He's a bully. That's how people like to describe him. He's a bully because he grabs you, he throws you everywhere. But on the feet, I think that Tony Ferguson has what it takes to hurt him. We saw Michael Johnson do it, and Michael Johnson arguably has pretty good hands, at least more or less on the same level as Tony. But the difference is, Tony isn't going to give him an inch when it comes to wrestling. He's going to sprawl, and that's something Michael Johnson couldn't do. So Khabib didn't really have any threat of, having that problem. Like, if he goes in for a takedown, he knows that Michael Johnson isn't really going to threaten him with anything dangerous or something that he doesn't really see. Tony Ferguson is not like that. Tony Ferguson has so much stuff that we probably haven't even seen him do in the octagon yet. We've seen him throw. We've seen him add so much stuff to his repertoire in the past couple fights. Who knows what he has in the tank? When you're working with Eddie Bravo, you always have some crazy stuff. Now, we know Khabib, training at AKA, has Daniel Cormier in his corner. He has Cain Velasquez. He has Luke Rockhold. He has some amazing fighters. Josh Thompson also comes to mind. He has a lot of very, very high-level fighters in there that are going to be teaching him, especially like Luke Rockhold, teaching him the striking and stuff like that. I'm assuming they work very closely together because on Embedded in particular, we always see DC, who is a head coach there in wrestling. He's very close, and DC is very close to Luke Rockhold as well. So it makes sense for them to be working very close by, especially because they're all top fighters in the UFC. They're all top pound-for-pound fighters. So it makes sense for them to be there, and I would expect him to start improving his striking. It's just a matter of, does the Russian Dagestani, who has a lot of pride, you can tell, especially in his Sambo, is he going to want to sort of embrace the striking completely? That's something that I think it seems like he's been doing, but we still see his defense in particular is pretty off on striking. So we'll see what happens. I think that Tony Ferguson definitely has what it takes to hurt him. In my opinion, I think that Tony Ferguson, having been the more active fighter, having faced the more tougher opponents more often, I think that's going to be in his advantage. So essentially, I think that's going to be the big factor in this fight, is the fact that Tony Ferguson is more well-rounded. Khabib is amazing on the ground, but Tony, I think, has the ability to match that and maybe even be more dangerous because of the fact that his jiu-jitsu is so good. He's pretty much dangerous from every position, whereas Khabib, he's a ground and pound guy who breaks you. I think Tony Ferguson has that as well, and he has more stuff to his ground game. So I think that's going to be the big difference there, and especially the fact that on the feet, I think it's pretty much it's all Tony Ferguson's game. I think he's going to be able to keep the distance, even though Ferguson loves to get into a brawl. So that might be a problem. He might get himself a bit too overconfident and want to really test Khabib on the feet and sort of get himself into some sticky situations. And if he does that, then that's a shame. But I think that he definitely has the superior striking, and that will be, in my opinion, the factor going into this. That the fact that on the feet, he's going to be better. He's going to be more dangerous. He's going to be more creative. He's going to be more powerful. Maybe not more powerful, but definitely he's going to hurt him more. I think he has more in his repertoire. He has great kicks and all that stuff. So all that added together is a very dangerous striker, especially against a guy like Khabib, who doesn't take a lot of hits, but he's definitely shown that he can take hits in a few of his fights. And he shows that he did get hurt by Michael Johnson, by the way. So that does give some confidence into Tony Ferguson's striking. And then on the ground, like I said, I think that Tony Ferguson can hold his own, and I think that for sure he will at least be able to get back up to his feet, if not test Khabib with some submissions. So that's going to be very, very good. I think it's going to be one hell of a fight. I don't know if it's going to be a finish. I think it might go to a decision, but I do think it will go in like the 4th or 5th round without a doubt, just because Khabib is such a tough guy. You can just see in the way he is, the way he acts, the way he talks, everything you can see from the way he's built. He's just a very, very, very durable guy. I mean, he's from fucking Russia. Let's be real. The Russians are tough motherfuckers. So that's going to be a very good fight, and make sure you take it. If you don't want to watch the rest of the card, at least check that one out. But the rest of the card is fucking sick too. So make sure you tune in to my next videos. I'll be talking about the main event, so Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and I'll be talking about the rest of the card featuring Mark Hunt versus Overeem, which is going to be sick as fuck. So make sure to tune into that fight, into that video. And if you enjoyed this one, please hit the like button, and please subscribe, and please share it with anybody you think will be interested. Share it on Twitter. Share it on any forums you're on. And like I said, guys, if you do that, I'm very, very thankful, and I will see you in the next video. Hopefully, I will see you in two of my other two previews, which once they come out, they will definitely be linked in this one. So make sure you check that out, and I will see you then.